We're going to start looking at voicing for 3 wind instruments in this video, and this is where it gets interesting and allows for richer chord voicings. With 3 notes, we can spell out triads or open voicings. So the broad sort of approach that I want to talk about in this video is that we can use 3 voices and spread them out into either open voicings, meaning with intervals more than a third between them, or closed voicings, kind of like a triad. And triad doesn't necessarily mean root third, fifth. It could be third, fifth, seventh. But in this video, what I want to do is start with the examples that we used in the last video with the 2 notes, with the thirds and sevenths, and adding in a third voice. So when you're voicing in this approach with thirds and sevenths, you can add in what's called a color note. So instead of going 3, 7, and then 5, you can go 3, 7, and 6, if it fits stylistically with the music, or 3, 7, and 9, depending on the voicing, instead of 3, 7, and 1. So there's all kinds of possibilities. Let's look at the first example, and here are the 3 brass. I'm using trumpet, tenor, and trombone, which is a very common grouping for 3 instruments. And over A minor 7 here, I've got C and G, which is the 3rd and 7th, and I've added in the B here, which is the 9th. And even though the rhythm instruments aren't playing it, it gives her a richer sound that you may or may not like or want in your arrangement, but it's interesting to be aware of. If you don't like it, you can voice this down to an E, and that'll be a little more vanilla sounding. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just a choice. So here we have 3, 7, and 9. And on the D minor 7, I'm going 7, 3, and then 9. So we're using what are called color notes, non-chord tones, but extensions. So let's listen to this. First, I'll solo them so we can hear what they sound like together. And then we'll listen to them in context. So here we have the 7th and the 3rd and then the 13th. And this is an open 4th voicing where we got a 4th between each of the notes, E to A and then A to D. And then here we're going D to A flat, which is a tritone because it's 7th and the 3rd, and then to C sharp, which is the 13th. So these are, I don't want to use a dirty word here, quote unquote, jazz voicings, but they're kind of interesting in a pop context sometimes. So let's listen to this in context. So it's a very modern sound with the 4ths like that. You may or may not want it, but it's a possibility. Now let's look at the next example here, and let's look at the voicings to start with. And here, this is the B flat 7 example, and I'm using trumpet, alto, and tenor. And here again, I'm using the color notes. So we're using here the D and the A flat, which is the 3rd and the 7th, and then the C, which is the 9th on top. And this is the 1 chord vamp that we're doing. So it's that nice extension on top, so a nice long build-up, and then that A flat to B flat that I did in unison last time, which sounds great, by the way, with 3 horns doing unison or octaves. But here I'm voicing it as triads. I'm going from an A flat triad up to a B flat triad in first inversion. So C, E flat, A flat, and then D, F, B flat. So it's a different kind of change of texture just for those little shots. So let's listen to this. So the triads are very different than the open voicing. And again, this is open because there's intervals greater than a third. And here I've got A flat to C on top, which is a third, but this one below is greater than. So it's considered technically an open voicing. So this works nicely, and it all falls in comfortable ranges for these instruments, which is a very important consideration when you start looking at 3-note voicings like this. Let's look at the next example. And here, I'll open these up. And here we're working with A minor 7, the slower kind of ballady example where it climbs up to the C major 7. And here I'm using the Session Horns Pro, alto, flugelhorn, and trombone. And this is, again, kind of a softer, warmer type of instrumentation. So here I've got a voicing of C and then E, a 10th above, and then G. So this is a triadic kind of voicing. I'm playing like a C triad, which is the 3rd, 5th, and 7th. So although it's technically a triad, it's not root 3rd, 5th, so it's a little more interesting. and then I'm just doing that in parallel, climbing up. Now, parallel motion is often not regarded as the most exciting way of inner voice movement, but in this case, I kind of like it because the whole thing has that stepwise climb up, so it reinforces that aspect of the harmonic movement. And then we get to the C major here, and we have the E, G, and B major, B natural rather, which is the major 7. So again, a triad. It's an E minor triad in this case, but it's the 3rd, 5th, and 7th. So this is close voicings, even though it's a 10th apart. It's triadic type of voicings, although the bottom notes are an octave lower. And it works interestingly. So here on the D7, I've changed it. I've opened it up, and I've got the C and the F sharp. So here I've got the 7th and the 3rd, and the B on top, the 13th, that color tone. So again, it's a little bit jazzier, but you may or may not like it. I think it's interesting in this context. So let's listen. So here at the section at the end, I'm using an open voicing, and I'm using here on the B minor 7, the A and the D, which is a 4th interval. So I'm using the 7th and the 3rd, and then the 5th on top. So it's a little more vanilla sounding. I don't have any color notes going on here. I'm playing the 7th, 3rd, and 5th. And then the inner voice is just repeating. So it's kind of boring, this part. I'm thinking there might be a more interesting melody on top, and I don't want the horns to draw too much attention, although I do want them to reinforce the harmony. That's at least conceptually what I'm thinking in this type of part. Of course, you could approach it differently depending on your musical context. But here, the inner voice is staying the same, and even the top voice is staying the same because these chords are very closely related. So here, I'm moving to the 3rd, 7th, and here I'm using the 9th. So it's, again, a static kind of voice leading, but this becomes a color note here, and then we're back to the 5th and the 3rd and 7th. So little vanilla, but an interesting diversion. And you'll notice that in all of these examples so far, I'm not doubling any of the notes. When you're working with 3 notes or 3-note voicings, if you double, that's going to make that note sound a lot stronger than the one that's not doubled. So it draws attention to that pitch, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but something you need to be aware of. Now let's look at the next example. And here we'll look at the horn parts first again. And this is the disco example where we're alternating between D minor 7 and G7. And I've got trumpet, alto, and tenor, which is a bit more of a mainstream pop type section sound for a nice biting attack to the part. And here I'm alternating the different triads between these two. So they're fairly vanilla voicings, but then I get a little more interesting at the second part of this phrase. So here I'm going F and A and C. So it's basically an F triad, but it's the 3rd, 5th, and 7th. So it's very inside. When I say inside, I mean there's no color notes outside of the real harmony. And here for the G minor 7, I'm going 7, 3, and then 5. So very kind of static. And I'm paying attention to the voice leading. So no individual voice is making any big jumps. This is going from C to D, and this is going from A to B flat, and this is going from F, staying on F actually. So this bottom part's pretty static. It's not uncommon when you're voicing for 3 voices like this for one of the notes at least to be fairly static in the harmonic movement. Now here when we get to the A minor 7, I'm opening it up a bit and I'm going 3rd and 7th. So that's like what we had in the last video with the 3rd and 7th and the 2-note voicings. And then I'm adding the 5th up here. So it's still triadic. It's basically a C triad over the A minor 7. It's the 3rd, 5th, and 7th. But I'm opening up the voicing. Instead of it being a closed voicing, it's an open voicing. Here we have the interval of a 5th and then a 6th over there. And then for the G minor 7, I'm moving down a tone. So it's, again, stepwise, parallel type movement. So check out when we're listening to this, the contrast between this sort of close triad voicing and then the more spread out triad voicing. And let's look at one more example. This is a new one. And here I'll use the notation window again to show you what's going on. So this is a new chord progression. It's in the key of C, C major 7, A minor 7, B flat major 7, and F major 7. So here I am mixing up using unison and octaves with 3-note voicings just to demonstrate the effect of having some notes move together and then spread out on other notes. So it gives a real different quality to the part. So here, these are playing in unison. This is an alto and tenor, so this is an octave lower. Even though it's written in the same range, it sounds an octave lower, and the trombone is playing up here and an octave lower than this. And these are all playing in kind of the higher end of their registers. And that's a certain quality as well. So it's important to be aware of where in the range of the instrument you're writing for. These could certainly work an octave lower, but I have them up here for dramatic effect. So not the highest part, but the higher range of the trombone, higher range of tenor, and higher range of alto. So here on the A minor 7, they spread out. And again, they're in the higher ranges here. So I'm playing the E and then the G and then the C. So that's the 5th and then the 7th and then the 3rd. So it's again a triadic voicing. And again, it's high in their ranges, which gives it a certain quality. And then it's just doubled here. And then another unison line again. And then it's spreading out on the F major 7 for the 7th, the 3rd, and the 5th over here. So a little bit of an open interval at the bottom. It's an inversion of the triad, basically. But going into 3 notes there versus the unison or octaves there. So let's listen to this. So again, the higher range, which has a very distinctive color, and mixing between unison and octaves and 3-note voicings. We'll continue with more in the next video.